Hello, and welcome to IBA's irregular series of Talking Propeller Heads. IBA has a B2B global client base from startups to NASDAQ-listed companies that puts us full on with the best and most innovative technology developments and the reaction of top media, reporters and commentators. Last year, AI spawned an offspring, generative AI. The gold rush started, investors and businesses piled in. Today, Mike and I are taking a sanity check on AI transformative technology with a little help from the Gartner hype cycle. Are we seeing a route taken by so many transformative technology that developers before and so clearly defined by Gartner? First, the money piles in, then we go through the trough of disillusionment, which is probably where we might be now. But the good news is we hit the slope of enlightenment and finally reach that plateau of productivity. So, Mike, where are we now? As Google and Microsoft buy shares in bigger and bigger power stations worldwide to feed the power-hungry AI, will we be Googling in the dark?
It's certainly an interesting place we're at the moment. We're seeing the headlines where all the big tech companies have announced multi-billion dollar investments over the next several years, where the financial markets have expressed a certain amount of skepticism about whether they're ever going to get that money back, and whether these things are viable both on capital expenditure, buying all that kit, and operating costs, all that power, all that space that's needed to run these things. The funny thing is that the underlying trend, whisper it, is that we're downsizing a lot. There was a sort of explicit, in fact, assumption that was put about over the last year that as we built larger and larger AI systems, especially large language models, the things that ChatGPT and Claude and others are based on, that at some point there would be some remarkable thing would happen and they'd achieve general intelligence just from being probability machines that turn out some mashed up thing that is the sum of everything they've seen on the internet to actual real intelligence. And that idea is probably pretty much dead. So the idea that we need bigger and bigger and bigger AI engines is now probably only clung to by the people who've got investments in power plants, in NVIDIA, and in warehouse space. Underlying that, what we're seeing is the discovery, again, over the last year or so, is that by downsizing these models, trimming them, we're still getting most, if not all, of the benefits of very large, very power-hungry, expensive systems at a tenth and less of the cost, and that starts to change the economics. So that's a pretty interesting state of affairs, and at the same time, what we're getting is a whole raft of other tools that act as cheaper and simpler ways of firing up LLMs and enhancing them so they fit into genuine business and industrial environments. So what's that mean at the moment? Well, it means we're still in kind of in the hype cycle at the top of it, because it's in the interests of a lot of companies. It's billions of value swings in valuations each day we're seeing, as we've certainly seen in the last week. At the same time as there's a quiet and steady undercurrent of real value being built up, which isn't as sexy or interesting because it simply doesn't attract that kind of money. But its impact in industry will be much bigger than the next large language model.
Bigger's not the way forward, Mike. I'm pleased about that. But we at IBA see some copy, PR copy, full of words, but without ideas. And that's the same copy that's giving top journalists now what we call AI fatigue. So, Mike, where are we on the journey through Gartner's trough of disillusionment? Are we now beginning to see glimmers of enlightenment? Who hopes so?
This is a particularly wild ride over all the other hype cycles we've seen over the last few years, and that's driven kind of by a lot of factors that aren't even technical or not even much to do with the technology world. We were in the recovery from COVID, and we got some of the big companies looking around to try and get a competitive advantage against each other. So, for example, Meta themselves, Facebook as they were then, went in and spent billions on the so-called metaverse, and we saw lots of blockchain initiatives, as well as Web3, which I never quite understood what that was supposed to be, and the utterly ludicrous NFTs, where buying a picture of a monkey could cost you $1 million. So lots of money was concentrated on these, all of which fell flat in one way or another. And we found that there was money going around looking for somewhere to pile into to make the next hype cycle, if you wouldn't, but certainly where to invest to get a competitive advantage. And that coincided pretty accurately with the rise of the very first really serious large language models like ChatGPT, which were very striking. And so it was easy for the man in the street, or indeed technology folks, to get completely overwhelmed, because anybody could go and ask ChatGPT, write me a story about Wellington boots in the style of Lewis Carroll, and it could do it, and it could do it pretty well. And it was a very vivid thing that captured everybody's imaginations immediately. So you didn't have to be a technical genius to understand some of the implications of that, but also probably overestimate what could be done with these things. And so there then ensued this vast inflation of the capabilities of LLMs, and people fairly irresponsibly believing that you could just plug in a raw LLM like ChatGPT, like Claude, like Mistral, like any of the many who've turned up over this last year or two, and just basically replace large numbers of human beings with a ChatGPT session. And we've learnt, some companies have learned quite painfully, that it ain't so. And so the kind of epic fails that we've seen have equally rapidly hit the headlines because they were so ludicrous. Stories about eating gravel or inventing completely mysterious things, and much more seriously, in the case which people jumped on far too quickly, in terms of replacing customer service representatives with LLMs, we saw LLMs inventing contract details that weren't there and getting their companies into serious financial and legal problems because they'd spoken authoritatively and they were talking rubbish. So, I mean, the other thing that's probably, we've now started to stabilize around that and sort of get some idea of what LLMs are capable of and not capable of. They're perfectly capable of doing boilerplate, and they're perfectly capable of spewing out the kind of marketing tripe that goes straight in the big round hole in the side of my desk. But to create compelling narrative or something interesting, stuff that captures us, that it probably escapes them, and probably always will, because they're predictive machines. What they do is they take in a lot of stuff about one subject, and they can produce something very generic. That's their job, is to produce something very generic and coherent that comes out the other side. But in terms of content, we as human beings tend not to respond to that. We glaze over because we've seen it a million times before, and this is just a slicker version of the same thing. Whereas what we do in all kinds of ways is we respond to novelty, and we respond to stories, right? And these are things which are not great properties of generative AI or AI in general. If we look at the idea of specifically marketing stuff, it's about weaving a story that we get involved in. And that tends to be a person-to-person thing that says, this is how some product or service made life better for me, and it's a coherent narrative, and it's told by a person, and we engage with that, and that's what captures us, right? Whereas what you'll get is a string of superlatives, because that's what generic marketing looks like if you get that out without any extra input from human beings. Certainly LLMs can help with boilerplate, and they can break the blank page problem, or they can summarize things and help you generate content, but unmediated, they're pretty much a disaster. The bottom line is really that Gen AI, yeah, the shine's gone off the apple, but it's still a case where it can make good people better at what they do by force multiplying them, by doing some of the grunt work, acting as a dumb intern whose work has to be checked, right? But still does grunt work that otherwise you'd have to do. But people who use them naively, who don't use them intelligently, will come out with worse output than they would in the first place.
So used properly, Gen AI can make good people better, but is likely to make mediocre people worse. And fellow marketers, remember, generative AI doesn't have an opinion, never speaks in the first person, but your subject matter and industry experts do. They're your pay dirt. You must use them. Mike, I feel we're approaching Gartner's slope of enlightenment now. Let's talk about the real positives for AI.
I think that, as we've said, we've seen very well publicized issues about the bad uses of AI, but there's an awful lot of low-hanging fruit, which are excellent uses of various AI technologies that are doable right now and have got enormous potential to both save money and make new money and improve various industries and services. And we've certainly seen very good results, for example, with things like medical x-rays and other kinds of diagnostic tools, where it's completely, we simply couldn't get enough brain surgeons to look at every scan by every person everywhere. Whereas we can get an LLM to go through that, and in fact concentrate the skills and the knowledge from multiple experts and scan through these things. But that doesn't actually reduce the number of brain surgeons we need. It merely means we've got a force multiplier in terms of now we've got a much better feed of information into real experts who now can do their job more efficiently, because they've got at least a first pass being done in a way that was pretty much impossible otherwise. And there's plenty more kinds of examples of these things where anomaly detection and the 80–90% kind of accuracy of picking out odd events are very, very important, very useful, and they generate either cost savings or avert disasters. If we look at, in the world of the Internet of Things, where we've got an enormous amount of monitoring going on these big complex systems we have across the world, it's what we have typically now are systems where we've got large amounts, lots of knobs and dials, lots of graphs. Some human being decides what the correct temperature for this pressure vessel is going to be, and they only send an alarm when that goes too high. But what you can actually do with LLMs is they can actually monitor the entire state of a whole industrial unit and know and learn what that looks like when it's running in normal operation, and monitor it for anomalies that will tell them that number 3 reactor is doing something funny in a way that probably, unless you had a vast crew of maintenance people with great expertise, you would be uneconomic to detect otherwise. And then you bring human beings in to bring their expertise, creativity, and instinct to work on these things. So there's quite a lot of stuff going on in terms of human augmented systems, and much less talk about replacement of people so much as force multiplying people. So I think the bottom line is that the idea we're going to see lots of the creative and very highly skilled jobs being taken away from people, I think is very unlikely. But what we have realistically is that across the world, lots and lots of jobs are in huge resource huge resource lacks. We just don't have enough people with reasonable skills. We can teach LLMs to reasonably simulate those skills to a sensible level of accuracy and be able to deploy those at very large scales. And in those kinds of things about fraud, about terrorism, about other things like industrial processes, all of those are where where the limited but useful accuracy of AI systems really makes a huge difference. Despite the fact that we've got a real roller coaster of emotions around AI, there's a very steady undercurrent of real applications coming up now, which have got real use, real utility.
AI is so democratic in its benefits, from farmer to financial, from shop floor to top floor. AI is going to be truly transformative in its benefits across industries and job functions. I think we're certainly on that slope of enlightenment. And thank you, Mike, for your insights. It's a compelling conversation as ever. And stay tuned, everyone, for the next installment of Talking Propeller Heads. Look forward to seeing you all. Bye.